She was forced to marry a gunslinger, but he protected the Chinese virgin like his own soul. Mei Ling sat on the straw mat, rubbing her eyes, and listened to the faint whispers of her younger brother playing quietly in the corner. Life had always been hard for them, ever since they had left China in search of a better future. Her father's back bore the marks of endless labor, and her mother's hands were worn and calloused, yet always moving, always preparing, always protecting. Today, however, the morning felt different. A tension hung in the air, one that Mei Ling could feel deep in her chest, though she could not name it. Her parents moved around the room in silence, avoiding her gaze. Mei Ling's heart sank. She had learned over the years to read the signs. When adults whispered, when their hands trembled, when their eyes looked at her like they were carrying a secret she might not want to hear. Her father finally spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mei Ling, we have no choice. You must marry him." "Marry who?" she whispered, hardly able to breathe. "Jack Calloway," her father said, his eyes downcast. "The gunslinger." Stories of his deeds traveled fast. A man who had never lost a duel, whose name alone could silence a saloon full of rough men. A man whose eyes seemed to carry the weight of death. And now, her parents told her, he would be her husband. Not for love, not for friendship, but because of debts her family could not pay and because the town wanted it. Mei Ling felt tears welling up, though she forced herself to stay silent. She had no choice, she realized. Resistance could bring disaster, not just to her, but to her entire family. Her mind raced, thinking of her small brother and how her mother's face would crumble if she refused. She swallowed her fear and nodded, though her heart ached. When the time came for Jack's arrival, the town seemed to hold its breath. Mei Ling's family led her outside, and there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather, with a long coat that brushed the dust beneath his boots. His hat shaded his face, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, and unreadable, followed every movement around him. Children ran and hid, adults whispered behind their hands, and the wind seemed to carry a sense of danger with him. Jack did not speak immediately. He dismounted from his horse with a grace that belied his reputation. His eyes met Mei Ling's for a moment, and she instinctively looked away, ashamed of her fear. She wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. Her father spoke first, explaining the arrangement in quiet tones. Mei Ling remained silent, barely breathing. Jack nodded once, a subtle gesture, and then looked around the town as if he were already judging it. It was not a warm gesture, and it was not meant to be friendly, but it carried a sense of finality. The deal was sealed. The journey to Jack's cabin outside the town was tense. Mei Ling rode silently behind him on the horse, gripping the edges of the saddle, feeling every bump, every movement as if the earth itself were conspiring against her. Jack did not speak, but his presence was heavy. She could hear his boots shift, the faint click of his gun belt, the rustle of his coat. He was a man of few words, and yet every silence carried meaning. As they rode through the hills, Mei Ling's mind wandered back to her family. Her father had cried when he told her, a rare show of emotion that shocked her. Her mother had held her hands, shaking, whispering that she must survive. Mei Ling thought of her brother and the way he had clung to her skirts, not understanding, but somehow sensing the weight of the world pressing down on them. By the time they reached Jack's cabin, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The cabin was small but solid, built of rough-hewn logs. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning wood into the crisp evening air. Mei Ling hesitated at the doorway, her hands shaking. Jack finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You'll be safe here," he said. "For now." Mei Ling watched from a corner, unsure of what to do. She felt trapped, yet something about the way he moved, careful and deliberate, suggested he was not the monster she had imagined. The first night was long and sleepless. Mei Ling lay on the small cot, listening to the wind outside, imagining all the dangers that could be waiting just beyond the walls. She imagined herself running, being captured, being hurt. She imagined the shame of being forced into a marriage she had not chosen. And yet, She also listened to the faint sound of Jack moving about, the way he closed the cabin door with care, the way he arranged his weapons as if expecting trouble but always with a mind to protect. Days passed, and Mei Ling slowly began to notice things. Jack rarely spoke of his past, and when he did, it was in brief, cryptic sentences. He had a way of looking at the world that suggested he had seen too much, that he had survived battles and losses that no one in town could imagine. And yet, in this cabin, he treated her with a strange, unexpected restraint. He never raised his voice, never forced her into words or actions, never looked at her with anything but the cold, protective focus of a man who knew the world was cruel. Mei Ling began to feel small sparks of curiosity amidst her fear. She wanted to understand him, to see what lay behind those sharp eyes. And though she would never admit it, a tiny part of her felt relief. Here, with this gunslinger who could end lives with a single shot, she was not treated as an object nor as a servant. She was allowed to be, but the town remained a shadow in her mind. Whispers of her marriage reached ears that would not have stayed silent. Some townspeople sneered, some whispered, and others simply watched from a distance, curious and suspicious. Mei Ling knew that outside the cabin, danger waited, not just from Jack, but from men who wanted to exploit the vulnerable, from men who had no respect for her life or choices. Jack seemed aware of this without saying it. He walked the perimeter of the cabin, kept his weapons close, and moved with a careful precision that suggested he anticipated trouble at any moment. Mei Ling noticed his small gestures, how he checked the locks on doors, how he arranged the firewood to block paths, how he positioned himself near her whenever someone approached. She began to see a pattern. He was not cruel. He was cautious, protective, and in his own way committed to keeping her safe. One evening, after a long day of silence, Jack spoke again. "You don't have to talk if you don't want," he said. "But know this, I will not let anyone hurt you. Not here, not ever." Perhaps, in some strange way, he could be a protector. Days turned into weeks. Mei Ling began to adapt to the rhythm of the cabin. She helped with small chores, learned how to keep the fire going, and even began to practice walking the hills nearby under Jack's watchful eyes. Every movement, every step was under his protection, but it was also a lesson in survival, a lesson she would need soon, though she did not yet know it. Evenings were quiet but filled with tension. Mei Ling often wondered about the man she had married, about his past, about the life that had made him a gunslinger feared by all. She wondered if he had ever known love, if he had ever protected anyone the way he now protected her. And though fear remained, curiosity began to grow, along with a cautious hope. Mei Ling also began to notice Jack's subtle kindnesses. He would bring her food first, make sure she had blankets on cold nights, and never raised his voice at her. He never asked for anything beyond her presence, and he never acted possessively. Slowly, Mei Ling began to see him not just as a fearsome figure, but as a man shaped by a harsh world, yet capable of unexpected care. Outside the cabin, life in the town continued, but Mei Ling no longer felt as powerless as she had before. She had a shield now, a man who would face the world for her. And while she did not yet understand the depth of his loyalty, a part of her heart began to feel the faint stirrings of hope. The forced marriage, she realized, was not the end of her life. It was only the beginning. The days in the cabin passed with a strange rhythm, a rhythm that was both frightening and comforting to Mei Ling. She had begun to understand the quiet power of Jack Calloway, not just the power of his gun, which could end a man in seconds, but the power of his presence. He moved with a careful certainty, always alert, always ready to protect. And slowly she began to feel that somehow, this man who had once seemed like a monster could be her shield against a cruel world. It was on a chilly morning, with frost still clinging to the edges of the small wooden windows, that Mei Ling began to notice the first cracks in Jack's stoic demeanor. He had risen early, as usual, cleaning his weapons and tending to the small fire, and he spoke for the first time that day. "Don't be afraid to ask questions," he said. "Knowledge can keep you alive." Knowledge, she had thought he meant survival, but there was a quiet patience in his tone, almost as if he wanted her to understand the world around her, not just to follow his rules, but to think for herself. She hesitated, then asked, Do you really care if I survive? Then he turned back to the fire, adjusting the pot of water for their morning tea. Mei Ling did not understand fully, but she felt a tiny spark of trust. Perhaps, she thought, he was different from what she had feared. The first test of that trust came sooner than she expected. One afternoon, while Jack was away tending to the small garden he had built behind the cabin, a group of men from the town approached. Mei Ling had seen them from a distance before, rough men with cruel eyes who had whispered about her arrival, who had mocked her family. She froze when she saw them advancing, her heart pounding. "Where is she?" one of the men demanded when they reached the cabin door. "We heard she belongs to Jack Calloway now. Is she here?" He had returned quietly unseen, and in a flash he was between Mei Ling and the men. The room seemed to shrink under his presence. His hand rested on the grip of his gun, but he did not raise it yet. Instead, he spoke, his voice calm but deadly. "Leave," he said. "Now." Jack Calloway was not a man to be challenged lightly. The men retreated, muttering threats and curses, but they left Mei Ling untouched. After they had gone, Mei Ling's hands shook. She had never seen such courage, and yet she realized it was not courage alone. Jack had protected her with precision and determination, and it struck her that she could rely on him, not as a master but as a protector. Days passed, and Mei Ling began to notice the subtle ways Jack looked after her. He taught her to notice the signs of danger, the subtle shift of a shadow, the sound of a footstep on dry leaves, the way men's voices could carry threats in hidden tones. She learned to move quietly, to observe carefully, and to trust her instincts. Jack never forced her, never pushed her beyond what she could handle. Instead, he guided her, shaping her awareness like a craftsman shaping a delicate piece of wood. Despite her fear and uncertainty, Mei Ling began to find a small sense of empowerment. She learned to carry herself with caution and dignity, knowing that the world outside the cabin was often cruel, but also knowing that she had someone to protect her. And yet, she also realized that Jack was not merely protecting her from others. He was protecting her from herself, from her own fear, from the hopelessness that could have swallowed her entirely. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Mei Ling found herself sitting beside Jack near the fire. The day had been quiet, and the wind carried only the soft sounds of rustling leaves and distant animals. She watched him carefully, noticing the faint lines of exhaustion on his face, the way he checked the locks on the cabin door, the way he arranged the firewood to block any sudden approach. "Why do you care so much?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Jack looked at her, his eyes meeting hers in a way that made her heart skip. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "Because no one else will." Jack and Mei Ling developed a silent understanding, a rhythm of coexistence that was unspoken but deeply felt. She learned to anticipate his moods, to read his small gestures, to understand the way he moved and thought. And Jack, in turn, seemed to recognize her growing strength, her increasing awareness of the world around her. He began to speak to her more, to teach her small skills that might one day save her life. How to handle a knife, how to recognize danger, how to move through the hills without being seen. Despite the protection Jack offered, the town remained a threat. Whispers traveled faster than the wind, and not everyone approved of Mei Ling's presence or Jack's unusual behavior. Some townspeople continued to gossip, plotting and testing boundaries. They saw her as an outsider, a vulnerable target, but they could not reach her within the walls of the cabin. Jack had ensured that. One day, a particularly bold man tried to confront Mei Ling while she was gathering water from the stream nearby. His intentions were clear in his threatening gestures, and Mei Ling froze, unsure what to do. But before he could approach, Jack appeared from the shadows, moving with such speed and precision that the man barely had time to react. Jack's voice was low and deadly. "Step away," he said. The man laughed, thinking to provoke him. But Jack's hand moved to his gun, and the flash of steel was enough to silence the man. He backed off, muttering curses under his breath, and left Mei Ling alone. Afterward, Mei Ling felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. She realized that Jack's protection was not just about strength, it was about understanding the world and acting decisively. And in that moment she began to trust him completely, knowing that he would stand between her and any danger, no matter how great. As the days passed, Mei Ling also began to notice Jack's own quiet struggles. He rarely spoke of his past, but she saw glimpses of it in his eyes, the weight of battles fought, the loss of friends, the loneliness that came with a life shaped by violence and fear. And yet he chose to stay by her side, to protect her as if her life were more important than his own. One night, under a sky filled with stars, Mei Ling finally spoke of her fears. "I am afraid," she whispered, "afraid of what the world will do to me and afraid of what I cannot change." "But you cannot let it control you. You must learn to face it, to understand it, and to use it. That is the only way to survive." And in Jack, she had found someone who embodied that strength, someone who could teach her, guide her, and protect her. By the end of the second month, Mei Ling felt a subtle transformation within herself. The fear that had once paralyzed her began to give way to cautious confidence. She could move through the cabin and the surrounding hills without constant terror. She could face the occasional threat from outsiders with a calm awareness. And most importantly, she had begun to trust Jack, not as a master, not as a jailer, but as a man who valued her life as his own. Despite the trust growing between them, danger still lingered. The town's eyes were never far, and not all threats came from outsiders. Some townspeople grew resentful of Jack's protection. Some saw it as weakness or foolishness. Mei Ling knew that the lessons Jack had taught her were only the beginning. She would need all her wits, courage, and the strange strength that had begun to blossom within her if she wanted to survive the world beyond the cabin. Yet even with the ever-present danger, Mei Ling began to see a glimmer of hope. She had learned to rely on herself, to recognize her own strength, and to trust the one person who had truly stood by her. Jack Calloway, the feared gunslinger, had become more than a protector. In his quiet, unwavering way, he had shown her that survival, courage, and even respect could exist in a world that often seemed ruled by cruelty and fear. For the first time, Mei Ling felt that perhaps her forced marriage was not the end of her life. Perhaps it was a beginning, a chance to learn, to grow, and to survive with dignity and hope. And as she looked at Jack, sitting by the fire, tending to his weapons with careful hands, she understood that she was not alone. Not anymore. The quiet rhythm of the cabin was shattered one morning by a distant, unsettling sound. Mei Ling, who had grown accustomed to the soft hum of the wind and the creaks of the wooden floorboards, froze as she heard voices approaching from the hills. They were not ordinary travelers. The voices were rough, harsh, and filled with menace. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a cold sweat on her forehead. Something told her that danger was near, the kind of danger that could not be avoided with silence alone. Jack, as always, sensed it first. He emerged from the cabin, his eyes scanning the hills with a sharpness that made Mei Ling both fearful and reassured. She had come to trust his instincts. They were rarely wrong. "Stay inside," he instructed, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "And do not make a sound." Mei Ling recognized some of them from the town, rough men who had always looked down on her, who had whispered cruel words when they thought no one was listening. But these were not alone. There were strangers too, men with hardened faces and weapons at their sides. They had come with a purpose. Jack stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. Mei Ling watched as he moved with controlled precision, his presence alone enough to slow the advance of the intruders. The men laughed, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that masks uncertainty. Jack's eyes were like knives, sharp and unyielding. "Leave now," he said. "There will be no mercy if you do not." Jack was not simply protecting her because he was forced to. He was protecting her because he valued her life, her safety, her very being. And the more she understood this, the more she felt a strange bond growing between them, one built not on words, but on action, on trust, and on the willingness to face danger together. The standoff did not last long. Jack moved with astonishing speed, drawing his revolvers and firing a warning shot that sent the nearest man stumbling. Chaos erupted. The men scattered, some fleeing in fear, others pressing forward with reckless determination. Jack moved like a shadow, precise and deadly, ensuring that none of them could reach Mei Ling. She had never seen anything like it. His movements were fluid, almost like a dance, but every step carried the weight of deadly purpose. Mei Ling felt a rush of adrenaline. Fear was still there, sharp and biting, but beneath it was something else, a sense of awe, a recognition of the man who had become her protector. She realized that she had come to depend on him, not just for safety, but for guidance, for understanding, for a sense of stability in a world that had always been unpredictable and cruel. When the men finally fled, Jack returned to the cabin, his eyes scanning the horizon for any remaining threats. He was calm, but his body carried the tension of someone who had faced danger and survived. Mei Ling approached him cautiously. Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, his eyes softening slightly as he looked at her. "For now," he said, "but you must understand something. Danger never truly goes away. We must be ready." She learned how to move silently, how to read the subtle signs of danger in the environment, and how to defend herself in small but crucial ways. He was patient, never rushing her, always ensuring that she understood each skill fully. She was terrified at first, but gradually, confidence began to grow. She realized that survival depended not just on fear or caution, but on knowledge, awareness, and courage. The bond between them deepened. Jack began to share fragments of his past, stories of battles fought, of friends lost, of the harsh realities that had shaped him into the man he was. He spoke sparingly, but each word carried weight. Mei Ling listened carefully, understanding that Jack's life had been one of hardship and loneliness. Yet, despite everything, he had chosen to protect her. And in that choice she saw a glimpse of humanity that was rare in their harsh world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a new threat emerged. A rider approached from the distance, galloping quickly across the hills. Jack recognized him immediately, a man known for cruelty and cunning, someone with a personal vendetta. Mei Ling's heart raced as she realized that this was not just a test of courage, but a confrontation that could determine their survival. The rider arrived at the cabin, dismounting with aggressive movements. "Calloway," he shouted, "we've come for the girl. Hand her over and maybe we'll spare your life." The rider drew a weapon, and Jack responded with the skill and speed that had made him legendary. Shots rang out across the hills, echoing in the valleys and sending birds into frantic flight. Mei Ling crouched behind the cabin, her hands pressed to her ears, her heart pounding with terror and anticipation. She had seen Jack in action before, but never in a situation this intense. The fight was short but decisive. Jack's precision and experience ensured that the threat was neutralized before it could reach the cabin. The rider fled, leaving behind only the remnants of fear and destruction. Mei Ling emerged cautiously, her legs weak but her spirit strengthened. She had witnessed the lengths to which Jack would go to protect her, and it filled her with a mixture of gratitude, respect, and awe. In the aftermath, Jack checked the cabin carefully, ensuring that no hidden dangers remained. He tended to the small injuries Mei Ling had sustained, a scratch from broken wood, a bruise from falling in her panic. His touch was gentle, careful, and deliberate. Mei Ling felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition that she was valued, cared for, and protected in a way she had never experienced before. As the days passed, Mei Ling's confidence grew. She began to anticipate danger, to move with purpose, and to assist Jack in small ways. She learned to watch the hills for signs of movement, to recognize the patterns of wildlife that could signal approaching threats, and to maintain the cabin as both a home and a fortress. Jack guided her with patience and encouragement, praising her progress while never allowing complacency to take hold. The town remained a source of tension. Rumors of the confrontation had spread, and not all townspeople were pleased with Jack's defense of Mei Ling. Some viewed it as arrogance, others as weakness, and a few as an opportunity to challenge him further. Mei Ling understood that the outside world was unpredictable, often cruel, and that survival required both vigilance and courage. One night under a sky blanketed with stars, Mei Ling spoke quietly to Jack. "I don't know if I could survive without you," she admitted. Jack's expression softened, though his eyes remained steady. "You could," he said. "You have more strength than you realize. I am here to guide you, to protect you until you can stand on your own. But never doubt that you are capable." Rival gangs, opportunistic townspeople, and the unpredictable elements of the wild tested their skills and resolve. Each threat was met with careful planning, decisive action, and unwavering loyalty. Mei Ling learned to anticipate Jack's strategies, to assist in ways small but meaningful, and to maintain her composure even in the face of danger. Through it all, the bond between them strengthened. Mei Ling began to understand Jack's silence, his patience, and his relentless commitment to her safety. He had become more than a protector. He was a teacher, a guide, and in the quiet moments a companion who shared her fears, her triumphs, and her growing sense of self. One afternoon, as they surveyed the hills for any signs of movement, Mei Ling asked, "Do you ever fear for yourself?" She realized that protection was not just about strength, but about discipline, awareness, and the willingness to face danger head-on, no matter the personal cost. By the end of the season, Mei Ling had transformed. The timid, frightened girl who had arrived at Jack's cabin was now alert, resourceful, and increasingly confident in her own abilities. She had learned to navigate the dangers of the hills, to anticipate threats, and to act decisively when necessary. And through it all, Jack remained steadfast, always near, always vigilant, always protective. For the first time in her life, Mei Ling felt a profound sense of safety, not born of fear or subservience, but of mutual respect and shared purpose. She understood that Jack's loyalty was not a favor, but a choice that had defined their survival and forged a bond stronger than any threat the town or the wild could present. Yet, even in this moment of strength and unity, a shadow lingered. Mei Ling knew that greater dangers awaited, that the town's secrets and rivalries could erupt at any time. But she also knew that together, she and Jack could face whatever came next. They were no longer merely protector and protected. They were partners in survival, bound by trust, courage, and an unspoken understanding that each valued the other's life as their own. And in that bond, Mei Ling discovered a new kind of hope, a hope that, no matter what trials the world placed before them, they could endure, survive, and emerge stronger together. The days following the last attack were quieter, but Mei Ling knew better than to believe that peace would last forever. Jack moved through the cabin with his usual precision, checking the weapons, tending to the fire, and ensuring that the small perimeter they controlled was secure. The hills were calm now, the wind carrying only the faint sounds of wildlife and distant rivers, yet Mei Ling could feel the tension in the air. Danger had not disappeared, it had only changed shape. Mei Ling herself had changed in these months. She had grown stronger, more aware, and more confident in her own abilities. No longer the frightened girl who had arrived at Jack's cabin, she now moved with purpose and understanding. She could read the hills, notice the slightest shift in the shadows, and anticipate danger in ways that even she had never thought possible. Jack noticed it too. Sometimes he would glance at her with a small, almost imperceptible nod, a sign that she had passed another silent test. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the distant hills, a scout came from the town, riding quickly and carrying a message wrapped in the worn leather of his saddlebag. Jack intercepted him at the edge of the clearing, his hand resting on his revolver. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp. The scout, breathing heavily, handed over the message. Jack unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. His jaw tightened and a shadow crossed his face. Mei Ling, watching from the cabin, knew immediately that trouble had returned. This time it was not a small group of men or an opportunistic rival. It was a coordinated threat, men who had been waiting for the right moment to strike, to take advantage of the perceived weakness of the gunslinger and the girl under his protection. Jack read the message aloud, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the danger it contained. "They are coming, all of them," he said. "Tonight, they plan to take the town. They will not stop until they have what they want." She had learned from Jack, grown under his guidance, and now she understood that fear could be transformed into strength if it was guided by knowledge and courage. Jack began preparations immediately. He reinforced the cabin, checked the weapons, and planned the defense carefully. Mei Ling assisted wherever she could, moving quickly and efficiently, aware that every action could make a difference. She packed supplies, helped set traps, and even prepared small decoys to confuse any attackers. Jack watched her closely, occasionally offering advice or correction, but mostly observing as she took on responsibilities that had once been unimaginable for her. As night fell, the tension in the air became almost tangible. The hills seemed to hold their breath, and even the animals were quieter, as if sensing the storm to come. Jack positioned himself strategically, covering the approaches to the cabin and the surrounding hills. Mei Ling stood beside him, her heart racing but her mind clear. She was no longer a passive observer. She was an active participant in the defense, ready to act to survive, and to protect herself alongside Jack. The attack began just after midnight. Shadows moved through the hills, and the sound of boots on dry leaves carried across the clearing. The attackers were careful, skilled, and ruthless, but Jack and Mei Ling were ready. The first shots rang out, echoing across the valleys, and the battle began. Jack moved with the precision of a man who had faced countless threats, his revolvers flashing in the moonlight, striking with deadly accuracy. Mei Ling stayed close, following his guidance, using the skills he had taught her to move silently, observe the enemy, and protect the areas most vulnerable to attack. Every movement, every decision carried weight, and every action could mean life or death. Hours passed in a blur of tension, noise, and strategy. Jack and Mei Ling worked seamlessly together, their bond and understanding evident in every coordinated action. Mei Ling realized that she was no longer merely surviving. She was participating, contributing, and making a difference. She saw the attackers falter, confused by her presence and Jack's careful planning, and she felt a surge of pride and determination. As the first light of dawn broke over the hills, the attackers began to retreat. Their coordinated effort had failed, their plans disrupted by the combined skill and determination of Jack and Mei Ling. The town was safe, for now, but the battle had taken its toll. Jack was bruised and exhausted, yet he moved through the cabin checking on Mei Ling, ensuring that she was unharmed. She was tired too, but the exhaustion felt different this time. It was the exhaustion of victory, of survival, and of hard-won respect. In the days that followed, the town slowly began to recover. News of Jack's defense and Mei Ling's growing strength spread, altering the perception of both. Where once the town had whispered rumors and scorn, there was now respect, cautious admiration, and even gratitude. Mei Ling found herself walking through the town with a new sense of confidence, aware that she had changed, that she was no longer the vulnerable girl who had arrived months earlier. Jack continued to guide her, but their relationship evolved. No longer was it solely protector and protected. It had become a partnership built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experience. Mei Ling had learned from him, grown under his guidance, and now stood as a capable and aware young woman, ready to face the world with courage and intelligence. One afternoon, as they sat together overlooking the hills, Mei Ling spoke quietly. I used to think I had no choice, no control over my life. But now, I see that I can face danger, make decisions, and survive. And I have you to thank for showing me that. Your strength has always been there. You just needed to see it for yourself. And in that understanding, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. The town, while still wary of outsiders and danger, grew more stable under the protection and guidance of Jack and the presence of Mei Ling, who had become a symbol of courage and resilience. She continued to learn, to observe, and to grow, her confidence expanding with each passing day. Jack remained by her side, not as a master, but as a mentor, a partner, and a friend. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Mei Ling reflected on the journey she had taken. She had arrived at the cabin frightened, vulnerable, and unsure of her place in the world. She had faced danger, learned to trust, and grown stronger in ways she had never imagined. And through it all, Jack had stood by her, not as a captor, not as a master, but as a protector who valued her life as much as his own. The final confrontation with the town's enemies had taught her a lesson that went beyond survival. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She understood that strength was not only physical, but mental and emotional. And she understood that trust, once earned, could become a powerful shield against even the greatest dangers. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Jack and Mei Ling deepened further. They spoke of plans for the future, of rebuilding and protecting the town, and of the possibility of a life that was not defined solely by fear and survival. Mei Ling knew that challenges would continue to arise, but she felt prepared to face them, knowing that she had the skills, the awareness, and the courage to act decisively. One afternoon, as they walked through the hills together, Mei Ling looked at Jack and said softly, "I am no longer afraid. Not because there is no danger, but because I know I can face it." Mei Ling felt a sense of peace she had never known, a quiet confidence in her own abilities, and a deep appreciation for the man who had protected her and guided her through the darkness. She realized that true protection was not about control or ownership. It was about care, respect, and the willingness to place another's life above your own. And in that moment, Mei Ling knew that her story was no longer one of fear and helplessness. It was a story of survival, courage, and the extraordinary bond that could grow between two people facing the harshness of the world together. She had found strength, independence, and a sense of purpose, and she had found it through the guidance and protection of a man who had once seemed like a monster, but who had revealed himself to be a guardian, a teacher, and a steadfast ally. The town, the hills, and the cabin all became symbols of that journey, of danger faced, of lessons learned, and of the unbreakable bond forged in the fires of challenge and survival. And as Mei Ling looked toward the horizon, she felt a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that she could face whatever came next with courage, wisdom, and the enduring support of the man who had once been a gunslinger and had now become her protector in every sense of the word.